My name's Eric. I've been working at the college for 22 years. I've been at the Soho site since 2004. And when I came here, it was quite different. Soho was quite different to what it is now, even though that's not that long ago, 2004. I would say that it's much tidier, it's a much nicer place than it was in 2004. I mean, there are a lot more strip clubs in 2004. There were a lot more strange shops, where guys would stand outside, women would stand outside and get people to come in and pay. They weren't allowed to sell alcohol, but they would get these people in and then basically bully them into paying enormous amounts of money for a glass of orange juice or something. A project which started in 1870 or around about 1870, and the idea was the government at the time thought that if they educated children, then they would be better adults. So, because at that time, there was no free education. Education was only for rich people. But the government at the time basically said, we need to educate. Everybody needs to be educated by law. But you have to go to school as a child. I'm not sure up to what age. 14, I think. It might have been younger, but you definitely had to go from the age of 6, I think it was. You had to go to school, but there were no schools. So they basically built, in between 1870 and 1900, I think they built something like 300 schools in London. And this was one of them. This was one of the first ones. So it was boys and girls. The boys were separated from the girls. They weren't allowed to play together. So the girls had a playground on the roof, and the boys had a playground underneath the school. So the school, all of what is now the main space here and the Mac room and the PC room, I think, I'm not sure, but most of that was open. So there wasn't any of the glass bit outside. You would just be playing in this playground on the ground, and there'll be toilets out the back, which have now been demolished. Classes apparently were up to 100 children, and there were so many books. Because they didn't have many books, they had to share the books. So there was a lift, a hand-operated lift, so they could move the books from one floor to the next floor for the next lesson, or because they had to share the books. Before our 01 was made, so all of it was out. Most of this downstairs was outside. This is one of the few rooms that was a room. Even back in Victorian times, it was a room. It has a fireplace there, I think. So this room would have been a room in the Second World War. The playground would have been open, so they must have put the bodies here, or in the corner room. The PC room as well was a room. So one of those two, maybe both. I don't know. Yeah, apparently that's what they did. So 01 started in 2004. It was funded by the European Social Fund, I think, and the London Development Agency. They put money in. The college put money in. And the idea was that we would be a kind of a bridge between education and the post-production industry in Soho. So people would come from here, and then they would go on to be apprentices, or they would just work for the post-production houses. So the funding lasted for 3 years. But what happened at the end of the 3 years? The post-production houses were supposed to then fund the training, but they didn't. They just all disappeared, so there was no funding. So we started to try and do full cost courses here, and then I also came up with the idea of renting out the studio to commercial companies. So we had BBC, Channel 4, Sky Movies did some stuff here.